Welcome to the Week 6 Early Edge NFL Prop Show presented by BetMGM. I am not the coach. I am your host, Eric Cohen. As you call me EC, you know me as EC. I'm on this show every week, and I'm glad to be in the host chair with Coach traveling the world. I don't know where he is right now, but hey, Coach, thanks for letting me have the opportunity to do this. All right, let's get right to the recap screen before we introduce the stars of the show. Oh, by the way, I'm sorry that I brought everybody down. What is this, a 10-7 week, and I was 2-3. So that means our other two, the geniuses on the show, they absolutely crushed it. And let's bring it in because one of them deserves 15 seconds for his awesome 4-and-run record. We have Proppy, we have Uncle Dave. Great to see you guys, obviously, in this role. Thank you for putting up with me in advance for the next 45 minutes or so. But Proppy, a winning week, not only a winning week, but an awesome 4-and-1 week. You have the floor.
Thank you, EC. What's up, Uncle Dave? I wanted to take this opportunity to apologize to absolutely nobody and for absolutely nothing. No, I'm just kidding. What's up, guys? I'm fired up. Week 6, we're here. I'm stoked. We've got some great picks. Let's get down to business.
Whoa, for a second, I thought we were getting the heel prop stars, getting ready to go in on all the haters. I don't know how many haters you have. How many people are dumb enough to hate on you? Probably.
You know what? As I have learned, there are going to be haters anywhere you go. But on this show, we have no tolerance for them because we win. At least you guys win. My Marvin Mims pick last night that I gave out on the show, not so good. 12 routes run, no targets, not getting over 17.5 receiving yards. All right, let's get right to the picks. If you guys have chat questions, fantasy football related, props related, put them in the chat. We will get to as many as we can throughout the show. But Dave, we're gonna start with you with a special teams prop because you have the only one on the board this week and a kicker that actually had a walk-off last week. Tell us about it.
He would have had a walk-off, and he's got a name that's fun to say. It's Younghoe Koo over 1.5 field goals, minus 119. Those were the odds that I found. And he's taking on the Commanders. They've allowed at least 3 field goal attempts in 4 of 5 games this season. And they've watched kickers nail at least 2 field goals in every single game this season. Koo has scored at least 2 field goals in 3 of his past 4 games. Falcons aren't shy about letting him try long-distance attempts. That's really all the research you need on this one. Younghoe Koo over 1.5 field goals to help the Falcons put some points on the board against the Commanders this week.
Seems like a safe bet, and I like that a lot. I love betting these field goal prop bets, but this week, I love fading the Rams. But at this point, I just can't with the Cardinals offense. We stay away from Matt Prater this week. All right, let's go on to the rushing props. And I'm going to start with the first one here. It's Kenneth Walker over 67.5 rushing yards at minus 115. You can go bet that at our partner BetMGM. So in his 4 games that he's played this year, 12, 17, 18, and 17 carries. The volume is there. He's averaging 4.4 yards a carry, and he's over this total in his last 2 games. Now, the Bengals have a great pass defense, but they are awful against the run. In fact, they're the second worst rush defense in the NFL, giving up 154 yards a game and more than 5 yards per rushing attempt. Kenneth Walker will get his on Sunday. Play the over 67.5 receiving yards. All right, Proppy, you are also on a number that is actually the same number, 67.5 rushing yards. But your guy is a little bit, I would say, higher in Uncle Dave's fantasy rankings than mine is. Tell us about him.
Yeah, we're talking about Tony Pollard here, going over 67.5 rushing yards. There's a little bit of irony with Tony Pollard. I'm sure Dave can attest to. Last year with Ezekiel Elliott splitting carries, the whole narrative was give this guy more carries, give this guy more touches. Now that he's the feature back, Zeke's obviously playing in New England. He's been brutally inefficient. Really just week 1 had a big performance, has struggled since then. While he's been inefficient, what's not inefficient is his situation. He's in an elite situation. The Cowboys have an excellent run blocking line. They're also hyper conservative. They run the ball a lot. It's the foundation of their offense. Now they're facing a Chargers defense that isn't quite the historically bad run defense they were last season, but they're still a below average run defense. So I love this spot for Tony Pollard to bounce back. Only had, I believe, 7 or 8 carries last week against San Francisco. They got routed. I expect Dallas to be competitive in this game against the Chargers. I expect them to lean heavily on Tony Pollard. I was starting to worry about his usage considering how many touches he was getting. Had a light workload last week, so I think he's in line for a big bounce back opportunity. Love this spot for him to go over 67.5 rushing yards versus a subpar Chargers defense.
Yeah, I think Proppy, this one just seems low to me. I don't know why the odds makers have gotten this one wrong. It's a nice exploitation of that market. Now, Dave, we have a fantasy question. We might as well start with you.
Let's go.
X Silent Reigns asks, do I start Breece Hall if Saquon Barkley is out, or do I pick up Chuba Hubbard or Deontay Foreman since Khalil Herbert and Rashawn Johnson are out?
Okay, and I kind of I don't want to make fun of the person asking this question. So I'm going to answer this as if this was my mother asking the question, you see. Because after what we saw from Breece Hall last week, I think it's safe to say that he is at least a must start as a number 2 fantasy running back. Whereas Chuba Hubbard is getting an interesting opportunity with Miles Sanders out, but I don't think he's going to put up a lot of numbers and touchdowns. And I certainly don't think he's got the upside that Breece Hall has. And I don't think Deontay Foreman, even with the chance of him being pretty much the only running back in Chicago that gets work, I don't think he's got the upside that Breece Hall has. And yes, statistically, it's a bad matchup. We learned before this very show today that Jalen Carter is out for the Philadelphia Eagles. He hurt himself in practice this week. That is a big loss, figuratively and literally. And so I'm more comfortable starting Breece Hall than I was earlier this week. I think he's a better start than Deontay Foreman and Chuba Hubbard.
Just to piggyback on what Dave said, EC, the loss of Jalen Carter cannot be understated enough. This guy is the front runner for Defensive Rookie of the Year. He's the highest graded interior lineman according to PFF through the first 6 weeks of the season. Unbelievably impressive for a rookie defensive interior lineman. So this guy has made a massive impact, a huge staple of this Eagles defense, and the reason they've been an elite run defense. So his loss will be felt for sure. It's a big boost to Breece Hall's matchup.
Well, since we're breaking news about the Eagles inactives, you might want to go log on to BetMGM right now and place your bets on Breece Hall. And you can do so by this way. New BetMGM customers can sign up today and get $200 in bonus bets. Just place your first wager of at least $10, and you will receive $200 instantly in bonus bets, regardless of your wager's outcome with bonus code EDGE200. Easy for me to say. So go there, bet $10, get $200. All right, it is time for receiving props, one of my favorite things that I love to do every week. And Dave, you have an interesting one to start because you have a couple of running backs, not just one, but 2 as part of your receiving props. Why don't you start us off?
Let's start with Tyjae Spears over 2.5 receptions at +110. Who is this guy? He's the Titans rookie running back who's been over this total in each of his past 3 games. Beloved fantasy stud Derrick Henry has been inefficient this year, and the Titans have caught on to it. The team's given Spears work as its passing downs back for most of the season, including giving them all but one of their 14 snaps on 3rd and 4th downs last week. And here's kind of a secret. He might be better than Derrick Henry right now. He played 2 of 3 snaps inside the 10 last week for Tennessee. We're not supposed to speak badly about Derrick Henry because, I mean, the guy could run me over and leave me in the hospital. He is a monster out there. He's just not running with the same type of burst and explosiveness. And if the Titans are looking for that in their offense, this is the guy that they're turning to. And make no mistake, the Ravens have a strong run defense, but they've given up at least 3 catches to a running back in all but 1 game this year. And best of all, because, I mean, everything what I said is pretty good, Spears has a 23.2% target per route run rate. What that means is 23% of the time when he runs a route, he gets the ball. That's through his first 5 games, and it's been consistent. So I like his opportunity to get at least 3 catches. The other running back receiving prop that I like is Raheem Mostert going over 13.5 receiving yards at -135. And I had to pick and choose between which Raheem Mostert prop I really liked. The reception one is really juiced in our favor. So I wanted to take that one, but I couldn't do it. I feel safest about this one. Mostert's been over 13.5 receiving yards in 2 of his past 3 games. He actually landed on 13 receiving yards on the dot last week and in week 1. But the difference between what he's dealing with now and what he dealt with last week is real simple. There's no Devon Achane in this offense. That should mean a little more work for Mostert in the Dolphins offense. And Jeff Wilson might be back. The coach already said he's going to have limited reps. Savon Ahmed is there, but they don't really like to use him. So I think Mostert's going to get more work than normal. The Panthers defense is expected to play a lot of zone coverage. That should open Mostert up for some easy short throws. And he's actually averaged over 3 targets per game this season. And he gets a little more than that specifically in snaps against zone coverage. And he's averaging an 85% catch rate and 8.3 yards per catch against zone coverage, which means all he has to really do based on those averages is catch 2 passes. I think he can do that. So we're taking the over on Mostert, 13.5 receiving yards.
I like it very much. Nicely done there. I want to ask you about Devon Achane, though, Dave. He's on IR now for 4 weeks. From a season-long fantasy, not dynasty, in redraft leagues, what would you do? Would you hold? Would you consider trading him maybe for a lesser talent? What would be your strategy there?
Well, you don't really want to trade him for a lesser talent unless you feel like your roster is in a bad spot or you need wins desperately. If I'm 1-4 and I've got Devon Achane on IR, then A, I'm pretty unlucky because I should have won more than one game with Devon Achane. And number 2, I need starters. I need guys that can help me put up some points and help me win. So if there's a manager in my league that's going to give me 2 good starters in exchange for Devon Achane, I would take it. But it's a little bit of a different situation compared to what's going on with Justin Jefferson's IR. We don't know when Jefferson's going to be back. We feel pretty good that Achane can be back in 4, maybe 5 games. And so fantasy managers who have Achane should try and be as patient as possible. Hopefully you've got some good running back depth that you can use to put some wins on the board while he's out.
Proppy.
If I'm 4-1 or 5-0 in a fantasy league too, I'm trying to acquire Devon Achane as well, because he's very likely, as Dave mentioned, going to return for the fantasy playoffs. Obviously, being on injured reserve, you probably have some owners who are willing to sell low on him. So I would at least poke around and see what you can offer, or see if there's an asking price for him, because he is going to be a league winner if he's back healthy for the fantasy playoffs.
You should give up a package for him. Try and give up 2 or 3 players for Achane. Make one of them a running back. You might have to overpay a little bit, but that's the type of move you make when you're trying to win in the second half of the season.
All right, so Dave, I have a 5-0 team with Justin Jefferson, who you mentioned. Would you hold, or would you trade him maybe for a guy like a Jalen Waddle if somebody would offer that?
I don't think that's enough for Justin Jefferson, because we're worried about how long he'll be out for. And there is a scenario that he could miss the rest of the season because, I mean, let's think about this. He's trying to get a new contract. The Vikings have 1 win. If their season's going nowhere, why would he come back and risk further injury? But we kind of said similar things about Jonathan Taylor, and now look at Jonathan Taylor. He's coming back. He's playing on a contending team. He's ready to rock and roll. I wouldn't give up a lot for Justin Jefferson if I'm acquiring him. I certainly, though, would give up Jalen Waddle straight up for him. So aim a little higher than Jalen Waddle straight up for Justin Jefferson at easy.
EC just shed a tear because he loves Jalen Waddle.
But I love Jalen Waddle too, dude. But he hasn't been putting up huge numbers. Certainly not like last year. And I think it's because the Dolphins have discovered a run game. And I think as long as they've got a run game that is at least effective, you're going to see Waddle continue to not have many games with 75+ yards. This week could be one of them. I will. All right,
well, that's good. You set me right up. So thanks, Uncle Dave. I'm going to roll with Jalen Waddle as my receiver pick this week, over 59.5 receiving yards at -115. So he was over this total in his first 2 games and then under in his last 2 after he came back from his concussion. But he did have 10 targets last week. He's getting nearly a 20% target share and a 21% first read share against zone coverage, which I would expect from Carolina this week as they try to prevent Tyreek Hill from going over the top. Also, Jalen Waddle is 3rd best in yards after the catch, only behind DJ Moore and Nico Collins. He is going to bounce back from the last 2 subpar games, including one of the times where I had him. I think that was in week 4. And he's going to have at least 60 receiving yards. And heck, I would play it up to 75. So there you go, Dave. I'm feeling confident about Jalen Waddle this week. Before we get to Proppy's picks, let's take a break and hear from one of our sponsors.
We need the sports news anywhere.
We've got breaking news to bring you.
Then get your sports anytime you want them. Big trade news overnight to discuss.
Because we know you need sports all the time.
A lot of movement in the rankings this week.
A legend adds to their legacy.
We're bringing you that breaking news right here on HQ.
CBS Sports HQ, anywhere, anytime, all the time.
And one of the people that you can find on HQ often is none other than PropStarz, who has 4 receiving picks this week. Why don't you give us 2 of them right now, Proppy?
Absolutely, EC. Yeah, we're going to start with Tyler Lockett over 51.5 receiving yards. It's been a slow start for Tyler Lockett this season. In my opinion, if you look at his target profile, which are his underlying metrics, he's a sleeping giant. He has a larger air yard share than DK Metcalf, similar target share. His ADOT is super healthy, so he's on the precipice of breaking out. I like this matchup for him. We're getting a big discount on the number. Typically, his number's in the low 60s. It's 51.5. They're playing the Bengals. We saw Joe Burrow look close to 100% last week. I think this game has some shootout potential. Could certainly see an increase in passing volume as well. I'm not afraid of the Bengals pass defense. They rank in the bottom 5 in coverage grade. They haven't had a consistent pass rush either. They play a lot of zone defense, which benefits Lockett. He's sort of their optimal receiver against zone defense. So I love Tyler Lockett in this spot, getting a big discount in a potential shootout game against the Bengals. And on top of that, weather was thought to be an issue. The latest weather report seems like it's going to have a minimal impact on the game, which certainly bodes well for the passing there. So love that spot for him. And then I'm going to go back to Dallas Goedert. Went to this guy last week, cashed for us on the very first drive versus the Rams. That was awesome. But yeah, his receiving line's only 36.5 when it opened or when I put it on the site. We saw him get 9 targets last week, ended up with 7 or 8 receptions for over 117 yards. Certainly shows the Eagles have a very concentrated target distribution. It's A.J. Brown, it's Devontae Smith, and it's Dallas Goedert. Dallas Goedert obviously got some squeaky wheel treatment, but yeah, 36.5 yards playing against the Jets, who bleed a lot of production to opposing tight ends. They have very good boundary corners. As a result, the middle of the field, they're a little bit vulnerable and susceptible to giving up production. So if you look at the Jets, they give up a lot of production to opposing tight ends. So at only under 40 yards where I'm comfortable playing it, I believe it's like 38.5 right now. I definitely think Dallas Goedert is a great look here. His number should ultimately settle around 45 to 50, I think, as the season progresses as well.
That's a great bet, Proppy. I don't know how the line is that low, especially coming off a 100-yard game. And as you said, against the Jets defense that also has been struggling of late. Now, Uncle Dave, you also have another tight end prop, but it's interesting. You chose an offense that hasn't been really good. In fact, they haven't scored a touchdown in the last 2 weeks, but you're confident in this play. Let's hear it.
How about an offense that has 1 snap inside the 5-yard line this season?
Oh, God.
Yeah, it's the Patriots. I can't believe their offense is worse this year than it was last year. But here we are. But we're not looking for touchdowns. We're not even looking for yardage, guys. We're looking for catches for Hunter Henry at plus 116. And here's a simple question. Who's catching the ball for New England this Sunday? They're down to Kendrick Bourne. They're down to Devontae Parker, maybe Ty Montgomery. They've got some injuries there, and they also have injuries along the offensive line. So there's really a limited amount of choices for Mac Jones to throw the ball to, and he needs to get that ball out quickly against Max Crosby and that Raiders defense that should be able to have some success getting near him because of the injuries to the offensive line for the New England Patriots. I expect the Patriots to go back to Hunter Henry, who had 4 or more catches in 3 of his first 4 games before having 0 in a tough-to-watch blowout loss last week against New Orleans. This game is actually winnable for New England because it's the Raiders. You guys have watched them. They're not great. And that includes how they fare against tight ends. They're below average in catch rate allowed to tight ends at 75.7%. And a tight end has had at least 4 catches against them in 3 of 5 games. The 2 teams that didn't, the Chargers and the Steelers, and they don't really use their tight ends a lot. I think the Patriots go back to Hunter Henry, and I think he ends up getting a bunch of catches, and he comes through on another bet for us that is plus odds.
But, Dave, I love seeing anything with a plus number in front of it, and I say that every week. But this one seems like a great bet, especially you would think that New England's offense is actually going to show up. Now, speaking of New England and the Raiders game, Proppy, you have one of your final 2 receiving picks that is in that game. But I just want to say, before you give out that pick, the guy that you're playing is also battling an injury. Are you still as confident knowing that?
Devontae Adams, EC?
That's correct.
Yeah, I am. I mean, he's been dealing with the shoulder injury 4 weeks. Looked 100% to me last week. Obviously, that was, I believe I saw some analysts suggest that was his worst performance, I want to say, in like the last 5 seasons. Still had 4 receptions for however many 40 yards, but just puts into perspective how dominant of a player Devontae Adams is. They were really putting a concerted effort into shutting him down. I don't think that's going to be the case with this New England defense, missing Christian Gonzalez. They weren't even that great when Gonzalez was on the field. So I think this is an awesome bounce back opportunity for Devontae Adams, who has one of the more elite roles in the NFL, coupled with an elite talent. So it all matches up to me here. Jimmy G's been fairly successful. Devontae Adams commands a massive target share. He gets targeted deep down the field, looks just as good as ever to me. So we're getting a steep discount. I think he looked 100% healthy as well. So absolutely love him at this number over 68.5 yards. And then we're going to go to Josh Downs, over 42.5 receiving yards. This guy is quietly one of the best rookie wide receivers. He is a slot man extraordinaire, an incredibly polished route runner with excellent hands, and he has really been coming on strong. Last week had a 6 target, 6 reception, 97-yard performance. Looks to be really comfortable with Gardner Minshew throwing the football. When Gardner Minshew has been under center for the Colts, who will be starting this week against the Jaguars, he has heavily targeted Josh Downs. I believe nearly equal amount of targets to Downs compared to Michael Pittman Jr., whose receiving yards are nearly 20 yards higher. So I love Josh Downs. I like him in this matchup against the Jacksonville Jaguars offense that could potentially push the Colts a little bit into a little bit of additional passing volume. So I'm all over Josh Downs. Love him. I also love him for fantasy purposes, both this week and season long as well. I really think he's a player on the rise.
You know, Proppy, I'm still bitter at Josh Downs because he took away the Michael Pittman volume that I had last week, and that's why I didn't have a winning week. I came within, 7-8 yards of hitting that Pittman prop, if not less, because Josh Downs was a big factor in that Indianapolis offense. Good pick there, and he's a good guy to look at for DFS purposes, a little bit cheaper than some of the other high-end receivers, and if you like him, I'm going to edit my lineup right after this show. Now, before we get to it, the passing props, and one that I really, really love and would recommend, but you guys will decide that yourselves. Let's take a break and hear from one of our sponsors.
Wake up to football highlights and news from around the world with the one and only Morning Footy team.
Rise and shine, football fans. Welcome to Morning Footy.
Start your all-day football craze with Morning Footy, part of the all-new Golazo Network.
All right, so Dave, I'm going to have you start first with the quarterback props. I'm going to save mine just after your pick, but it's an interesting one because I think game flow will be in your favor in Tampa Bay.
It is, and Baker Mayfield over 32.5 pass attempts is the direction that I'm going. I'm seeing it at -119. He's taking on a Lions team that forces offenses to abandon the run. They've got a great run squad going on defense. I expect that to continue, and that should be fine with the Bucs. They're coming off the bye. They'll have Mike Evans back on the field, and they'll be just in time to see a Lions defense that sees quarterbacks average 39 pass attempts per game against them. As a matter of fact, every single team to play against Detroit this year has had a quarterback throw at least 36 passes against them. We're getting this at 32.5. Mayfield should be busy in this one, especially since I don't expect running back Rachaad White to have a particularly good game. That's it. That's the analysis, and it's my favorite prop of the week. Baker Mayfield over 32.5 pass attempts.
So would you recommend him in DFS formats, and would he be a suitable bye-week replacement if you needed him in 2 quarterback leagues?
He's in that conversation as a good bye-week replacement. I like Gardner Minshew as well. Sam Howell would be better than both of them. And it really comes down to price. I haven't looked at his prices in DFS, but let's say he's not a top 15 quarterback in terms of price. I'd give him a long look for sure.
Proppy?
Correlated play I'd be remiss if I didn't mention was I put out on SportsLine's site yesterday Rachaad White under 52.5 rushing yards. Dave mentioned this Detroit run defense has been super stout, elite. They haven't allowed a running back to eclipse 43 yards this season. They faced Kenneth Walker, Bijan Robinson, Aaron Jones. They have been very stout. That number is currently at 44.5. So if you are a SportsLine subscriber, you got nearly 8 yards of closing line value on a pick I put out yesterday.
Wow.
Proppy, before I make my next pick here, I want to ask you about Devontae Adams. How high would you go on that? And then secondly, would you also recommend Jacoby Myers?
I do like Jacoby Myers. I've been beating his drum all season. His target, they have a hyper condensed target share. Jimmy Garoppolo throws to Devontae Adams, Jacoby Myers, and then he checks down to Josh Jacobs. That is it. That is great when we're looking at prop. We want a really condensed target distribution. So I don't typically advise taking multiple receivers on the same team in one game. This may not be the best matchup against a New England team who they could really establish Josh Jacobs against. So I personally wouldn't play Jacoby Myers this week in games where there could potentially lead to a high passing environment. I'm fine with it, but yeah, not this week. As far as what I'd play Devontae Adams up to, comfortable with him up to 74.5.
Dave, the revenge game angle when it comes to fantasy football, and I bring that up with Myers going up against New England. I love to play that angle. You know, it's fun. I actually have Myers in the DFS lineup now. Proppy says no. What do you say?
I think it's going to be popular. I think that that's something that you'll see in a lot of DFS lineups because Myers has been playing really well with Jimmy Garoppolo. And I think a lot of people are going to chase that. And the revenge game narrative, it's something that we ask football players about from time to time, and they say that it's a real thing. They sometimes have love for the teams that they played against, but they still want to go and beat them.
Okay, that's fair. I appreciate that. Now, another guy that I have in my DFS lineups this week, and I've teased this for a couple minutes, Matthew Stafford, over 280.5 yards passing at -115. Now, if you watched last week's show, you know I recommended Joe Burrow, and we had a little bit of a conversation against the Cardinals, and look what he did. His over-under was 250.5, and he went for over 300. So I think Matthew Stafford does this again. Why do I think that? Because he has 3 games this season of more than 300 yards passing. He is first in big-time throw rate and 4th in the entire NFL in passing yards. Oh, by the way, the Cardinals have given up the 7th most passing yards per game, the 7th highest passer rating, and the 4th highest adjusted completion rate. I don't even know what goes into adjusted completion rate, but I do know that when Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua are on the field, the Cardinals are not stopping them. Now, I'm not predicting a 15-catch, 192-yard, 3-touchdown game like Jamar Chase had last week, but those guys are going to eat. So for DFS formats, I'm in on Matthew Stafford over, and I would pair him with one of those Rams wide receivers if you can afford it. All right. We have one more prop, and then we'll go to the recap screen. And Dave, you have the only combo prop this week with the Bengals running back, Joe Mixon, over or under?
Well, first of all, I think adjusted completion rate eliminates drop passes, passes thrown out of bounds, spiked balls, stuff like that, things that the quarterback necessarily, is either doing to avoid completing a pass or trying to ground the ball, stuff like that, or something that has nothing to do with the quarterback. So that's when adjusted completion rate.
Thank you. Okay, so the Ravens, Lamar Jackson's adjusted completion rate would be like 100 because all his receivers do is just drop passes.
Right, like last week that would have been the case exactly, right? And so they don't count a lot of the passes that, the quarterbacks aren't at fault for. That's adjusted completion.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Okay.
Combo prop, Joe Mixon. Under 87.5 total yards at -115. He's been under this total in 3 of his past 4 games. He's had under 15 carries in 3 of his past 4 games. And I wonder if his target share takes a hit now that Joe Burrow is feeling better. Nice job, EC, with that one. I'm glad I tailed you on it. And if T. Higgins is back for the Bengals. Remember, this is going to make that passing offense look a little bit better. Burrow's willing to throw further downfield. He's got his number 2 wide receiver back. It all makes sense, and it might mean that Joe Mixon doesn't see 5 targets like he's seen in each of the last 2 games. But this is the stat that I care about the most. No one has hit this total against Seattle this year. The Seahawks, good against running backs. Who knew? They've been awesome against the run, 2.6 yards per carry allowed to running backs. And we talked about this on our podcast. Almost all of Mixon's runs have been between the tackles. It's been weird. They're not trying to help him win on edge runs. When they use him through the passing game, that's a completely different story. But just this heavy usage of A and B gap runs, and he's just not efficient with them anymore. He's one of the older backs in the league, and I think that's going to contribute to him going under 87.5 total yards against Seattle on Sunday.
So I love to ask the fantasy question since we have you on here, and I'll open this up to both of you. When it comes to Joe Mixon, he does look like he's lost a step. Dave, I'll start with you. Is Chase Brown somebody that's worth rostering in deeper leagues this season?
No, because I'm not sure if the coaches in Cincinnati are ready to trust him. We've seen Travion Williams be the number 2 running back. I think it's something like 3 straight games where Chase Brown has played 4 or fewer snaps. And I can't believe I even could reel that off the top of the dome. He's barely playing right now.
Proppy, I'm going to ask you one. This is kind of a spontaneous one, and you haven't had any time to prepare, so I apologize in advance. In a dynasty league that I have with you, last week before Connor got hurt, I picked up DeMarcado from the Cardinals. Who is a guy that you would say is a backup running back that probably is widely available, that might be a stash, maybe a Rico Dowdle type from Dallas or a Damian Harris from Buffalo, somebody like that you might recommend going forward in season-long leagues?
I'll give you a running back and a wide receiver. I'm glad you brought up Rico Dowdle. I'm high on Rico Dowdle. He passes the eye test to me. He's explosive. He's in a great situation. He even has a tiny bit of standalone value with how much Dallas runs the ball and with these large workloads they've given to Tony Pollard. Tony Pollard's also never handled workloads this large, so it wouldn't surprise me if he ends up experiencing an injury and we see Rico Dowdle get some starts. So he's a very high-end handcuff. He's a guy that you can pick up in a lot of leagues, so I have him on quite a few rosters. I like him quite a bit. But a guy who's available in almost every single league, a wide receiver who I really think, I would say maybe realistically 25% chance he could be a top 36 wide receiver by the fantasy playoffs, is Jonathan Mingo, rookie wide receiver for the Carolina Panthers. The guy reminds me a lot of Anquan Bolden. The Panthers are very committed to getting him the football. He has a higher first target rate read than any single wide receiver or pass catcher on the Panthers. He's had at least 6 or 7 targets in all games that he's been healthy and active. Obviously, it requires Bryce Young maybe taking a step forward and Mingo learning the nuances of the position. But he's coming off a season best game of 5 catches, 45 yards. If you're a SportsLine subscriber, you'd also know I like his prop this week. But yeah, I think Jonathan Mingo has a chance, and he's available in every single league, even 14-team leagues that I'm in. He's available, so he's a guy that I would stash that potentially has some big upside.
And thank you, Proppy. Before we get to the recap screen, Dave, I have one more for you. Now, you do your fantasy rankings at CBS Sports, which are awesome, but you also are not afraid to differ when other rankings are kind of have players in the same area. Are there a couple players this week that come to the top of your head that you would say you are higher on than, let's say, most fantasy experts? So last week, for example, David Montgomery was one of them, where I think you were higher on him than most.
He was my number 2 guy.
Yep, and he excelled. He had a good week. Is there anybody off the top of your head that stands out that, hey, for DFS players or even props, even though it's not an official play, that you might recommend?
Off the top of my head, the first name that came up was Brandon Ayuk, because I like the 40. Okay, kind of a roundabout story. I like the idea of the 49ers playing against a man-to-man coverage defense, and I think that's what the Browns will try and do. And I'm not really worried about Brock Purdy. Let's put them together, Brock Purdy and Brandon Ayuk. I think they can play well. However, I think there might be a weather issue in Cleveland that could keep that from really breaking through. But let's just say that there isn't a weather issue. Those are 2 guys that I would expect a big game from. And I kind of like that stack. And we've also seen Purdy not lean too heavily on Deebo Samuel lately. And last week, George Kittle had the 3-touchdown game, and that was outstanding. But I don't know if that's necessarily obviously the touchdowns are consistent. He's not getting a ton of targets from game to game. I think Ayuk's got a shot at maybe double-digit targets if the Browns insist on playing man coverage in an attempt to rattle Brock Purdy. So that's one guy. Another one is Cole Kmet for the Chicago Bears, who I think is an absolute start at tight end. Ever since the Bears benched, not even traded Chase Claypool, but benched Chase Claypool, this dude's been the number 2 target getter for Chicago. He sees a target share of over 20%. Target per route runs great. He leads. Think about this. Think about who the Bears have on offense. He leads them in red zone targets over the last 2 weeks. I think that he's absolutely locked in as a tight end 1. I've got him ranked ahead of Pitts, Goddard, and Kittle this week. Those are 2 that come to mind. One other name that's the opposite of that, EC, and one that we've had some brouhahas about, and I'd love to get Proppy's mindset on Ramondre Stevenson, who is averaging a yard per carry less than Ezekiel Elliott. Last week was the first time he didn't have 16 touches in a game. He didn't even have 10. And I know they're playing the Raiders this week, but I don't know if I trust that offensive line to pop lanes for him. I don't know if I trust this offense to heavily involve him when they really haven't done that through the first 5 weeks of the season. I'm nervous to start Ramondre Stevenson in fantasy, and I toyed with the idea of taking the under on his rushing yardage on our show today.
He has been.
Go ahead, Profi.
Yeah. Just going to say Ramondre has been so disappointing this season, pretty perplexing in my opinion. Obviously, Dave mentioned New England's offensive line has been putrid, really hasn't done him any favors. But the fact that like a 50-year-old corpse of a running back in Ezekiel Elliott is averaging an additional yard per carry over Ramondre is unacceptable. Also, the really disconcerting thing with Ramondre is last season, even in matchups where he would struggle running the football, he had a phenomenal receiving profile and he was heavily involved as a receiver. Not the case this season. So, yeah, the alarms are certainly sounding if you're a Ramondre Stevenson owner. I was very bullish on him last year coming into this year, but really can't explain what's going on with him. He's an ascending player, should be considering his age. I thought he looked very good last year. No real explanation. Obviously, New England's offensive line isn't good or doing him favors, but he should still be performing better, certainly in the passing game.
Well, and I want to appreciate you guys off the top, just doing that randomly with no warning. So I appreciate that. That's how good these guys are. And I'm honored to work with them every week. Now, I want to thank our buddy Buckets for being in the chat. He will not be making a video appearance on the show, but I do want to point out, no, Dante Culpepper does not play, but he did hit his Rangers, Linfield, both teams to score play from the Friday early edge. So way to go, Buckets. Nicely done on that. All right, let's pull up the recap screen and see where we're at. No, nobody wants to hear me read these off, but let's play a little game. Proppy, I'll start with you. If I gave you $100 to put on either one of Dave's plays or one of my plays, what would you put it on?
I'd put it on Dave's under for Joe Mixon.
And why?
Dave, I thought made a great argument, but really the Seattle run defense, I think, is above average. Certainly very good. And then I would also say that Mixon has been brutally inefficient. We're also seeing teams opt to throw heavy versus Seattle. They're a pass funnel. Joe Burrow looks healthy to me. So, yeah, I just think it's a combination of a poor matchup for Mixon, good matchup for Joe Burrow, and Joe Mixon's been very inefficient.
Dave, we know I'm kind of frugal, but let's say I wasn't and I gave you $100 to put on one of these plays that are not one of your own. Where would you go?
Let me first ask this question to Proppy. When you talked about Josh Downs, did you mention the connection that he had with Gardner Minshew?
I did. I mentioned that he's had an equal target share to Michael Pittman Jr. when Minshew's been throwing the football.
Which is incredible. How about his yards per catch rate? Did you mention that?
I did as well.
Yeah. Okay. I just wanted to make sure that we covered that because that's the bet I would make. It was on my list. Here's what I saw. This was on a site that I looked at today. His receiving total was 45.5. Is that what you got it at? I got it at
42.
42. Now that's even better than what I saw. I saw it at 45.5 at minus 125. And then I went to the combo page and it was the exact same number for total yards.
But less juice.
But less juice.
That's a great tip, Dave. So I'm glad you brought that up. That's something I would encourage people to do, depending on what sports book you use. But you can often find, for whatever reason, you can see pretty much every single receiver listed under the receiving and running back line. And despite it, you would think there would be like a steeper price. You can usually get a better price than their just naked receiving line. So I think that's great advice, Dave. So if you're ever looking and you see a guy at an unplayable number, just double check a receiver, what his rushing plus receiving line is, because oftentimes you'll find it at less juice or even a yard lower sometimes. It's inexplicable, but certainly something that I think should be taken advantage of. The explanation for it, real quick, if I could, is because props are such a low liquidity market, which means that there's just not a lot of money coming in on them. So as a result of that, a minimal amount of money can have a large effect and influence on said prop. So when that happens, it distorts the line, causes movement in either direction, and then the other line just hasn't received any sort of, the other line is just basically sitting there, and there's just like a lag time between when it updates. So you can often find that the additional line will provide more value.
Is that why we see a lot of odds where the line looks good and you want to take it, but it's like minus 185, something like that, because somebody already beat you to
somebody beat you to it, and it's just been hammered heavily recently.
Got it.
Before we get going here, I want to ask you guys just maybe a quick tip for everybody out there. when we doing the research for this show is definitely not easy. You think it's easy, you look at the board, you find a prop, so be it. Dave has to put together all these fantasy rankings. Proppy's writing a million articles on SportsLine. Is there a tip that each of you can give to somebody at home when they're doing their own research? Is there somewhere you would recommend they look? Proppy, I'll start with you. What's your one tip?
I'll give you a few tips, EC, if I could, because I'm a man of the people.
Sure, of course.
First and foremost, find quality projections, whether they're from us, whether they're from another group or another site. Find quality projections. Look where there are big imbalances on said projections against the prop lines. Even that alone, you can find some substantial edges there. I'd also learn the difference between mean versus median. I don't have time to explain that to you right now, but that's something I would definitely look into. Understand what soft skill capping is. There's a marriage between quantitative and qualitative analysis. Learn the difference between that. Record your results and record the closing line value of said results, meaning right before kickoff, if you've taken a prop, let's say you take Josh Downs over 42.5 receiving yards, go look at what that number closes at, because that'll be a great indicator if you've beaten the market or not. If you're taking the over and he closes at 47.5 yards, that's a very good indication that you're on the sharp side there. And then last but not least, don't be results oriented. Just because a play loses doesn't mean it was the wrong play. I give you a Javonte Williams under 42.5 rushing yards play that I put out. That closed at 35.5. He went over, of course, but he had some big runs. I'd play that 10 out of 10 times and be confident it would cash 7 of those times. So yeah, those are my best tips for you.
I love the process over results. I do the exact same thing in fantasy. Certainly on a week-to-week thing with fantasy football, it's very fickle because one week a player goes off, everybody rushes to him. The next week he disappoints. That's just the nature of the beast in fantasy football. What I would want to add is this: your money is valuable to you, and how you spend that money, whether it's on groceries or bets, it's important. You don't want to just do it without necessarily feeling like there's a reason for it. Okay, there's a reason why you go to the grocery store to buy food. You got to eat, you got to make a meal, you got to make yourself pancakes on Saturday morning. But when it comes to your bets, don't just blindly follow because Proppy says it or EC says it. Don't fade me because I say it. Go with what feels great. Go with what sounds great. And you don't have to go and bet every single thing. It's okay if you go a week without betting at all. Your money's valuable and it'll be there next week. I used to be addicted to playing poker and I had to stop myself. And one of the things I told myself was, it's always going to be there. The casinos never close. There's always going to be a game open for the rest of my life. Almost wherever I live, it's going to be there. You don't have to rush anything, or you don't have to rush in anything. Here I am trying to rush to say something because I know we got to get out of here. You don't have to rush in anything, and you don't have to overdo anything. So when you feel a bet and in your gut, it says, I don't know if Josh Downs is going to go over. Don't worry about it. Don't take it. It's okay. Even if it hits and you're not a part of it, it's okay.
Wow. I'll tell you what, I was taking notes on the side here, just put down my pen. That was deep from both of you and really appreciate that because that's how you make money. And based on what Dave just said, I probably should take my own advice. I'm an action guy. I like to have action all across the board. So you know what? Maybe sometimes it is best just to sit it out. Guys,
sometimes.
It's an awesome show. Absolutely loved it. For Proppy and Dave, I'm EC. Thank you so much for watching. And as I always like to say, let's hit it big. Good luck.